Beat generation, existentialism in jazz. French existentialism was a philosophical and literary movement that flourished primarily in the 1940s and 1950s, standing out as one of the most influential currents of 20th-century thought. Its main exponents were Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, although he rejected the label existentialist, and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Main ideas. Existence precedes essence. Unlike philosophical traditions that argued that human beings have a predetermined essence, as in classical metaphysics or Christianity, existentialists asserted that human beings first exist, and only then define their essence through their choices and actions. Another main idea is radical freedom and responsibility. Human beings are born to be free, according to Sartre, meaning there is no fixed destiny or nature that determines their actions. This freedom implies enormous responsibility, as each choice defines who we are. Anguish and absurdity. Freedom generates anguish, as there are no guarantees or absolute values to justify our choices. Camus particularly explored the concept of the absurd, the lack of intrinsic meaning of life in an indifferent universe, as in the myth of Sisyphus. Bad faith. Sartre criticized the human tendency to run away from freedom by making excuses or hiding behind social roles, such as, "I'm just an employee," or, "it's my nature," thus denying one's own autonomy. The French existentialists, especially Sartre and Beauvoir, argued that the individual should engage politically, as neutrality is itself a form of choice. Philosophy should not be merely contemplative, but active in transforming the world. The other and the gaze. In Being in Nothingness, Sartre discusses how awareness of the other objectifies us, generating conflicts, such as the famous analysis of the gaze. Beauvoir expanded on this idea in The Second Sex, analyzing the oppression of women as a product of social objectification. Differences among authors. Sartre, more focused on radical freedom and the denial of God, existentialist atheism. Beauvoir applied existentialism to feminism and ethics, showing how society defines women as the other. Camus, although close to existentialism, he emphasized the revolt against the absurd without resorting to closed philosophical systems. Merleau-Ponty, he brought a more phenomenological approach, integrating body and perception into existence. The connection between French existentialism and American jazz is a fascinating cultural phenomenon that emerged primarily in the post-World War II era, especially in Paris in the 1940s and 1950s. This relationship was not merely accidental, but rather a convergence of philosophical ideas, existential attitudes, and artistic expressions that reflected freedom, improvisation, and rebellion against social conventions. After World War II, Paris became an intellectual and artistic hub, attracting writers, musicians, and philosophers. Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the city's bohemian neighborhood, was the epicenter of this scene, where existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus frequented cafés like Café de Flore and Les Deux Maggots. At the same time, American jazz musicians, many of them black, fleeing racism in the United States, such as Sidney Bechet, Miles Davis, and Charlie Parker, found a more welcoming environment in Paris. Clubs like Le Tabou and the Blue Note became places where intellectuals and musicians mingled. Jazz, with its emphasis on improvisation, individual freedom, and raw emotional expression, resonated with existentialist ideas. Freedom and authenticity. Just as existentialism preached radical freedom and the creation of one's own meaning in life, jazz valued improvisation. The musician created in the moment, without fixed rules. Rebellion and nonconformity. Both jazz and existentialism challenged established norms. Jazz was seen as outsider music, just as existentialists rejected traditional values. Emotion and anguish. Jazz, especially bebop and cool jazz, conveyed a sense of anguish and emotional intensity that echoed Sartre and Camus' philosophy of the absurdity of existence. People who bridged both existentialism and jazz. Boris Vian, French writer, musician, and jazz critic, he was a bridge between two worlds. He played trumpet, wrote about jazz, and was close to Sartre. His book, The Foam of the Days, is heavily influenced by jazz. Juliette Gréco, singer and existentialist muse, she frequented the circles of Sartre and Beauvoir, and her singing style was deeply influenced by jazz. Miles Davis in Paris. In 1949, Miles Davis toured Paris and became friends with Sartre and other intellectuals, incorporating elements of existential philosophy into his music. For existentialists, jazz represented artistic freedom and resistance to oppression, both political, in the post-war era, and racial, as many jazz musicians were black, fighting racism. Sartre and Beauvoir saw jazz as an art form that embodied the struggle for authenticity.